Thank you.
Yeah.
So good morning. Glad to be here and glad to talk to you about our TNReady results and our standards. So first, before we dig deep into results, we want to talk just a little bit about our standards. And even before that, I want to talk to you about this image with the pillars. So if we think about where we want all of our students to be when they graduate high school and they finish that 12th grade, is we want them to be college and career ready. But in order to get those students there, it's this literally this pre-K through 12 journey that these students are on. And there are three very important things to get those students there. And one of the pillars here that we have is effective personnel. And that's where you are really helping us in preparing our teachers before they even walk into that classroom that first day to be effective. And then, of course, all the work that our districts do across that teacher's career with professional development and those sorts of things. But that's extremely important that we do have those effective educators working with our students, teachers, and leaders. Another important piece is aligned materials. And so we really have to have strong, aligned instructional materials in the classroom to help those effective teachers, and they have to be aligned to our Tennessee academic standards. And the third piece that is so critical is aligned assessments. And so here when I'm talking about aligned assessments, I'm talking about a complete system of aligned assessments. Not just TNReady, not just the state summative assessment at the end of the year, but all those assessments that teachers are really working with to give them the data they need on individual students to help guide their instruction. So whether it's an exit ticket in the classroom, whether it's a unit test, whether it's benchmarking, or whether it is our summative assessment at the end of the year, but really that aligned system of assessments that all works together to give the teachers the information they need to be effective. All of those things are really based on the foundation, which is our standards. Everything goes back to our Tennessee academic standards, our teachers utilizing and teaching the standards effectively, principals and district leaders planning professional development around the standards effectively, our materials aligned, our assessments aligned. Everything goes back to that foundation of our standards. So our standards are really the what, and these other pieces that we see in the pillars are how we're going to get our students to be college and career ready. So in saying that piece, let's talk just a little bit about our English language arts standards. As you know, they are revised, and this is our first year of implementation with our revised standards. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy Qualls to talk a little bit about the structure of our revised standards.
As Tammy mentioned, our standards have been revised, and I'm happy to report that that was a huge task taken on primarily by Tennessee educators who sat down with each other and really made the decisions necessary to decide what our students need to know in order to be those college and career ready students. And we strongly believe that the standards are the bricks that when they're masterfully laid, they can lay that foundation for our students so they can, when they walk across that stage and receive that diploma, it's not just an empty piece of paper. That diploma means something. It means it's their exit ticket. It's their ticket into the world so they can make the decisions whether they want to go into a post-secondary college situation or whether there's a career that they have their eye on. And we truly believe that the standards prepare our students for that level of success. And as you probably have noticed, the standards have been redesigned in the way that they have been laid out, primarily in the development of a K-5 foundational literacy strand. We strongly believe that there are foundational skills that our students need in order to be successful within all of the other strands. And so the spelling, the encoding, the decoding, the fluency, the phonics and word recognition, the vocabulary have all been compiled into that foundational literacy strand. And as you may notice, the newly created EPP standards have been largely organized around these 5 strands, not only in their content, but also in that integrated nature of instruction. So when we look at the progression of skills that is evident within the standards, in that K-5 grade band, we recognize the importance of an integrated nature being taught within the standards and that they lay a solid foundation for language and literacy. And then as our students enter into that middle school, or that 6-8 grade band, we really want those standards to be reinforced upon this foundation, but then increasing in that complexity of not only the text, but also the task we ask of our students. And then as our students enter into that home stretch, those high school years, that 9 through 12 grade band, we really want these standards to be built upon in sophistication and style. So we want to show you what the standards look like, and there is a vertical progression of skills. And I don't know if you're familiar with the old standards, but they had skills and standards sitting in isolation. So as a third grade teacher, I would go in and pick up my standards, and the only thing I saw was third grade standards, unless I sought out second grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, beyond and below. So I was really sitting on an island within myself. And we know that most elementary teachers are already there. They go into the rooms around 7:30, they shut the door, and they exit their rooms around 3:30. They might come out to go to the bathroom once, and they come out to take their kids to lunch or PE, but otherwise they are in an island. And we do not want that to be seen as far as the standards are concerned as well. So there is a vertical progression of the skills that's laid out in the standards. So for instance, a standard that is a fluency standard, or this standard in particular, reading for informational and reading literature, has the standard for third, fourth, fifth, and beyond. So you can see where your students are coming from, and then what your role is in that student's journey, and then where they should be ready for, or what they should be ready to be able to do in that next grade. Went ahead. So we want to make sure that we recognize that the ELA shifts are in full drive. So we have been in this shift since around 2013. And so hopefully our teachers are in full drive mode as far as our shifts are concerned. But keeping in mind that we want there to be a high level of text complexity. And I think back to my teaching years when I was teaching second grade. I loved reading the Boxcar Children aloud to my students. I loved the book, they loved the book, and we were all happy. However, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Boxcar Children, but it goes something like this. Oh, Henry, I'm thirsty. Yes, Lucy, I'm thirsty too. Wait, do you hear that? Yes, it's water. And it was very low level, but I loved the book, and I wanted them to love the book too. So every day after PE, I sat down with my students and I read the book aloud to them, and we were all happy, except for one small little piece that was missing. They could have read it themselves. They did not need me to read the Boxcar Children. And we know that when we're reading aloud to our students, we should at least be reading a grade band, if not two, above what they are able to access themselves. And not only in read alouds, but we should not be dumbing down the text for our students. It's amazing what our students can do if we just let them show us that they can. So this shift in text complexity, where they have regular practice with complex text and its vocabulary, is a very important shift in our classrooms. It's amazing how much knowledge students can build when they have access to complex text. So we want them building knowledge, not just in literary text, but most importantly in informational text. And we've definitely seen a shift in our classroom instruction, where teachers are not continuing to just pull those favorite children's books off the shelf, but they're making sure to expose children to things and themes and ideas and concepts that they may never be able to experience except through the pages of an informational text. And also, we're really pushing for our teachers to encourage our students to pull evidence from the text. What did you learn from this text? And I remember back in the old days when we would call the children to the carpet and we would ask them, ooh, tell me about a time that you've been fishing. And you see about 3 or 4 hands go up, and they can tell you about how dad or grandpa, their uncle took them fishing at the pond on the farm. And there's always that one student, that one I'm talking about. They have a condo at the beach, and they go fall break and spring break, and they go deep sea fishing, and they have all those amazing experiences. But what happens to the rest of the children who've never been fishing before? you've lost them because they have no connection to what you're talking about. And so already we've asked them to step away from the text and away from what we're about to experience in the text, as opposed to, let's read about flying fish. And everybody has access to the text, and everybody can pull evidence and information and new ideas and concepts from the text. So these shifts are evident in our classroom, and we'll show you some data here in just a few moments. And we'll also show you where we are lacking in these shifts and where we definitely can see you partnering with us in our districts to help teachers understand the importance of these shifts as well. So we strongly feel like the role of the standards is to drive instruction, and the standards also drive our assessment, and the standards drive educator prep. So Tammy is going to come and talk to us about the findings from our Ela assessments.
Thank you. So I'm going to step back for 1 second because I always have something extra to say. Sometimes I talk too much. But anyway, I want to step back and make a point about the vertical progression of the standards. So we actually have our standards for English language arts posted in one large PDF for our English teachers, our ELA teachers, not pulled out. Our other subjects, literally they can click a drop-down menu and pull just the math standards for 4th grade, for example, but not ELA. We literally get emails every week, both of us, that says, could you please take the standards and put them in a little more user-friendly document and do a drop-down menu so I can pull just my 4th grade ELA standards? And we always answer no, because it's very important that you look at the progression. And so one point I want to make, and I'm going to use an example with a writing standard. So there's a writing standard between 4th and 5th grade that the only or the main difference is pacing. So if students are writing a full essay, one of the things that's going to shift when they jump from 4th to 5th grade is they should be pacing their essay appropriately. So I'm a 5th grade teacher, and I have read my standards, but I didn't read 4th grade standards. And so I really don't realize that the one big piece that's been added is pacing. So I have a couple of students that write a beautiful essay, beautifully crafted, great ideas. They provide evidence from the text, and they do all of those things that they were doing in 4th grade really well. Maybe it wasn't paced appropriately. But I've scored them really, really well because through my standards, they've done a really good job of that, but pacing, they didn't do so well. But really, I actually just scored my students really well on a 4th grade essay, not a 5th grade essay, because they didn't bring in the pacing piece. So it is hugely important in ELA that they are looking several grade levels below and several grade levels above so they see where they fall and what the shifts are between each of those grade levels as they move up. Because as you heard Sandy talk about moving up the grades, you're moving up to a little more complex, then you're moving up to that sophistication. So it's really important that our teachers understand that vertical progression in English language arts. So our findings, TNReady, our summative assessment. So first, I just want to make the point that we found very consistent results, 2nd grade through EOC. Literally, some of the weak areas we found on our grade 2 optional assessment was a weak area in our EOC high school assessments. It was really amazing. Areas that were strengths for students were strengths all the way across the board as well. So very consistent all the way across. We also saw evidence of shifts in instruction. So literally the 3 ELA shifts that you heard Sandy talking about, we saw some evidence that some of these things were happening in our classroom, which was great news. In fact, 2 of the 3 shifts, we found strong evidence that we had shifts in instruction in the classroom. We still have a pretty good bit of work in one of the 3, and we'll talk about those specifically here. So text complexity, we really saw our students doing well with the academic vocabulary piece. So our students had strong performance to where they were determining the meaning of unknown words using context clues. They also did well determining the meaning of multi-meaning words, and that was literally evident all the way across the grades. And better yet, when we had a question that was connecting a vocabulary word and how that word was impacting the greater, larger text, our students did well there. So we thought that was a great success, and we're really glad. So we saw shifts there in that first shift. Knowledge. So our students actually did well when they had to grapple with the complexity of the text. So questions that literally would dig deep into something that was complex within the text, students did well with. So we saw some good movement there and changes in instruction. Where we're still struggling is evidence from the text. So our students are literally picking a piece of evidence, but they're not picking the best piece of evidence from the text. And I'll talk about this when we get to writing in just a second as well. But students with writing are literally just throwing some evidence in their essay, but they're not necessarily pulling evidence that supports their ideas, or they're not pulling the best evidence to put in their writing. So we're still struggling a little bit there. It's like they know they need to pull evidence, or they know they need to find evidence, but they're not doing the best job with that when they work with that. So successes we had in reading. So, and I think I briefly mentioned these, so I'll go through this a little quicker. Again, the vocabulary. Students were doing well with vocabulary. And then also they were really doing well with grappling with that complex text. So the great thing about that is that means our teachers are putting complex text in front of our students. So that was a really good success. We were proud to see that. So successes in writing. Our students did well with narrative writing. So we have 3 genres in our standards. All 3 should be taught at each grade level. Students and teachers do not know which of the 3 genres those students will be asked to write in their writing prompt on their summative assessment. So any of the 3 are game for the assessment at any grade level. And our students showed success with narrative, which is great, and we were glad to see that. Narrative writing sometimes kind of gets the short end of the stick. I'm going to be like, well, you know, it's not quite as academic as argumentative and informational. That's not true. Just as important. In fact, we have a lot of careers to where adults use narrative writing within their careers. If we think about a police officer and he's going to write up an incident of an accident, he's writing a descriptive narrative. My own daughter is a nurse. She's fresh out, 6 months in. She calls and complains sometimes at nights. I had to write up that incident, such and such happened. And then I'm like, oh, that's great, honey. You wrote a descriptive narrative today at work. And then she's like, would you please hush? I want you to be mom, not teacher. Just listen to me complain about my job today. And I'm like, okay, I'll hush. But so there's just 2. There are many careers that use narrative writing. So it's still important that we don't back off the focus just because we saw success. But it was a good place that we were glad that our students did well. Also, if we kind of think about, too, maybe the why they showed more success with narrative writing, in the ELA classroom, they may be being exposed to literary more than informational text, and we know that students literally will write and mimic what they've read. So all of that literary text they're reading in their classroom becomes mentor text, and then they do show more success on narrative. Okay, areas where we're still seeing a little bit of challenge. So with reading, the first bullet here is literally talking about central idea. So that is reading standard number 2. Students will see a reading standard number 2 central idea on every text that they are exposed to on their TNReady assessment. Our students struggled in grade 2 with central idea. They also struggled in all the ELC every grade level. It was consistent. They struggled with central idea. So they tend to pick details instead of the actual central idea. They just pick that detail. So it's an area that we really need to work. It's very, very important skill we need to work. It was weak all the way across the board for our students. Students also, like I've mentioned, struggled with picking that best piece of evidence. So on TNReady, we have a 2-point item called an EBSR, Evidence-Based Selected Response. And those items will ask students to pick something like find the central idea. And then part B of that item will ask them to select the best evidence that supports their choice from part A. So our students can sometimes, like I said, they're still struggling with central idea, but even the students that get part A correct, where they found the central idea, will tend to not pick the best piece of evidence in part B, so they get part B incorrect. So we're really struggling with picking that strongest evidence. So writing, we have several areas that we see our students struggle with writing, and our team has an advantage that we get to look at, read, and evaluate hundreds and hundreds of student papers across all the grade levels. And so some of the things that we see real consistent is that our students are struggling with counterclaim in the argumentative essays. And it was a pretty big struggle. And one of the things that is a very big concern about this is that in our revised standards, counterclaim moved down 2 grade levels. So in our standards last year, students had to be able to recognize the opposing view or counterclaim in 8th grade. And they had to be able to refute the counterclaim in 9th grade. In our revised standards this year, students have to be able to acknowledge the counterclaim in 6th and 7th grade, and they have to be able to refute it in 8th grade. So for our middle school teachers, that's a huge shift. And if you're just reading the standards, it's some small wording in those writing standards, and it would be very easy to overlook that. So it's very important that our middle school teachers are aware of that. Secondly, for informational essays, our students struggled with informational essays, and what they end up doing is they literally struggle just to start composing that informational essay, and they end up summarizing. So they literally just summarize the text, and they regurgitate facts instead of actually bringing in their own ideas, pulling all of that evidence from that text, and writing that informational essay. And the last bullet that you see on this slide is adhering to the prompt. So literally just getting off topic, and our students tend to do that. And one of the places, if we think about those last 2 bullets and put those together, let's say, for example, students have an informational prompt, and it is asking them to compare and contrast 2 ideas, and so they have 2 texts. So literally, students will go off topic, and all they will do is they'll summarize text 1, and they'll summarize text 2. They've never developed any ideas, and they weren't on the prompt. So we have a 4x4 scoring rubric for our writing prompts, and the first 2 traits, focus on organization and development. Literally, if they do that, if they go off prompt, they just summarize, they literally will lose those first 2 traits. That's 8 points out of the 16 points. That's 8 points out of their entire assessment. So it's huge for students. So we really need to help students really not just read and start writing their text, but literally, what does their prompt say? What do they need to do working with that prompt? So some instructional shifts and things we need to think about when we think about these things. So grade 2 findings, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Sandy and let her talk about results from our grade 2 assessment.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with our grade 2 assessment, but it is optional. And in other words, it is something districts opt into, and we're proud to let you know that out of 146 districts, we had 100 districts opt in that first assessment cycle that it was offered. Also, it is based upon the standards. So it's not one of those things where teachers are trying to guess what's going to be on the assessment. It is completely developed in connection with the Tennessee Department of Education and our academic standards, and we pull in committees of educators to assist us and go through item by item, passage by passage, and build this assessment as well. Also, it is integrated in nature. So the assessment is built in such a way that when students read a passage, whether it's literary or informational, the items that they are asked about the assessment is not just comprehension-based items, which is what's typically been asked of students. But with that same passage, they will be asked those foundational skill items. So they will be asked to encode, they will be asked to apply grammar and its usage. They're also asked to apply phonics and word recognition skills. We also have fluency items on the grade 2 assessment. So we are asking students to read a set of 20 statements. And so we are moving away from the typical ORF, that oral reading fluency. We're asking students to simply decode. Now we're asking students to decode and comprehend. So the way that we will be able to tell if a student can decode and comprehend is when they read a statement, it is either true or false. For instance, it might say something, and this is one that we do not use, and we'll tell you why, but it says something like, a dog can drive a car. Well, students know that a dog cannot drive a car, so of course they would mark no. But believe it or not, we did have to take that one off the assessment because not long after we developed that one, there was a dog that drove a car through a Walmart. So needless to say, we do try to stay very true and literal for our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade students. So we ask our students in a timed 1-minute sitting to read, decode, and answer yes or no to as many of those statements as possible. So needless to say, we're very proud of our grade 2 assessment and its integrated design. And here are some things that we found with that grade 2 assessment. There is an overall shift in instruction. So we noticed that teachers are implementing an integrated approach. In other words, it was very evident that students could read and comprehend text and then decide the meaning of words based upon the context. So it's not like reading was taught and then you went to recess, and then you came back and you taught vocabulary separate and apart. It was very evident that teachers are connecting the vocabulary acquisition from the provided text. We also noticed that students are really able to pull and apply language skills to the text at hand as well. There's evidence that the 3 shifts are a focus of instruction, so we notice that students are more so able to deal with informational text as well as literary text. So it's very obvious that students could grapple with more complex text, and they were able to determine, like I said, the meaning of unknown words within the text as well. Here are some areas that are still remain a challenge. As Tammy mentioned, Standard 2, that main idea, central idea, is a struggle for second graders as well. And you might be sitting there and thinking, why does that even matter? Why does it matter if students can pull out the main idea of a text? Let me give you one example of why it matters. Sunday night, 6 o'clock, I'm sitting with my daughter at ACT tutoring. We need one more point to get an extra $10,000 a year. Do you know what the ACT report told me? She struggles with, main idea. 1 point equals $10,000. We need that money to send her to that higher ed institution. It matters. It matters for a variety of reasons, but that's just one reason that matters in my family. Something else we're noticing that students are struggling with, we have listening items on the grade 2 assessment as well. Students did really well listening, which surprised us. They did really well listening to passages that were literary based and recalling the information and being able to answer items tied to those listening passages. They struggled with informational passages. Probably because in an informational passage, there's lots of propositions and ideas hitting them at once. So we know that's an area that we probably need to focus on as well. Here are some overall successes from our grade 2 assessment. We notice that they are able to grapple with more complex text, and they're able to read and respond to literary and informational text about the same. The p-values, there was not much of a difference there. They're able to determine the meaning of unknown words and phrases. It's no longer a situation where they look at the item and it asks them, what does this word mean, or what's the meaning of the word? But it asks them, what is the meaning of the word within the passage? And students really showed that if they didn't know the meaning of the word, they obviously were able to go into the passage and read around and look for those context clues to determine the meaning of the word. And there was no difference between their ability to apply their foundational literacy skills if it was informational or literary text. So here are some challenges we were noting in grade 2. They did perform better on determining that central idea, the main idea of a topic, when they were dealing with literary versus informational. They performed significantly better when responding to items with listening passages that were tied to literary listening passages, as I mentioned, as opposed to informational literary passages. And they were able to respond to items dealing with sentence composition. In other words, they applied their spelling and grammar skills at a higher rate than phonics and word reading skills. And that really took us aback. That shocked us. And so we've kind of met, and we're wondering if it could be that typically phonics instruction in the classroom is very oral in nature. So the teacher either sits the students at the carpet or at the reading table, and I say, you say, we say, I say, there's this, it might be explicit instruction. However, is there an opportunity for the student to actually have the application of the skill? So if they have learned a skill in isolation, that AI says A, and they've killed and drilled the skill, do they also know other letter patterns that make that same sound? And you might be thinking, why does this truly matter? Well, it matters, of course, as you know, when students are asked to decode multisyllabic words. Now, all of a sudden, it's not that letter pattern in this 20 set of spelling words. All of a sudden, it's this letter pattern in a multisyllabic word. So that is why we're really focusing in on how well do students know and recognize and recall the sounds that letter and letter patterns actually make in words. So we're going to talk a few moments about the ELA design.
So we've actually not seen any changes in the design of our 5th through 11th EOC assessments for TNReady. There are still 4 subparts. Subpart 1 is a writing prompt for our students. They'll see one of the 3 genres. They have 85 minutes in 6th through 11th grade to complete that. And then the rest of the assessment is literally reading and language. So they'll have an editing task, and then they'll have their text, their passage, and they'll have their comprehension or their reading, the standards that are applied. They come from the reading standards. So literally that's the same as last year, so we've not seen a change. And then we actually do have a redesign of 3rd and 4th grade.
So we are proud to announce that we have redesigned the 3rd and 4th grade assessment to mirror the grade 2 assessment. So no longer are we going to have items that are sitting in isolation. We want the assessment to mirror classroom instruction, and we want to see that integrated nature of classroom instruction. So students will come across literary or informational passages, and they will have items associated with these areas: reading comprehension, those foundational literacy skills, including vocabulary, phonics and word recognition, conventions and spelling. They will also have listening items on the 3rd and 4th grade assessment tied to both literary and informational text, as well as that foundational literacy fluency item I mentioned, the set of 20 statements where they answer yes or no based upon their decoding and comprehension. And also students will be asked to write, and we have scaffolded the approach. So let me step back and tell you that in grade 2, we are asking students to write to 2 prompts, a literary prompt and an informational. So one of the prompts will be tied to literary text, one prompt will be tied to informational text, and they will be asked to write 3 to 4 sentences based upon Writing Standard 8, which asks them to recall from personal experiences and evidence from the text to respond to a question. In 3rd grade, our students will also respond to 2 prompts. However, they will be asked to write at least 1 cohesive paragraph. We are not limiting them to a paragraph, but once again, we are not asking them to write a full-blown essay in 3rd grade. Now, it doesn't mean that that's not a classroom experience that they might have, but on our assessment, we're asking students to write to 2 prompts. We want to be able to see how students are performing when they write to literary versus informational text. In 4th grade, students will see 1 prompt. It will be tied to either literary or informational, and it will be tied to writing standards 1, 2, or 3, which is the 3 modes of writing. And they are asked to write multiple cohesive paragraphs. Notice we never say 5-paragraph essay. So that is something that we should note as well. So I think I've gone over the design of the grade 2 assessment, and just want to keep in mind that when we talk about our pillars of success, we really want to indicate and stress that the academic standards are the what and those pillars are the how. And we're so excited to be able to work alongside you as we make sure that our teachers are ready to get our students ready for that college and career ready success. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at the email address below, and we'll be more than happy to assist you in any way we can.